Did quarterbacks get more injured in 2023 than they have in the past? What was the impact of fantasy teams with having some significant quarterbacks out for chunks of the season? Is there a way to prepare for losing a player at the position that is most protected and needed in the NFL? Hey, we're back, baby. We're back, familia. It's time for the off-season edition of the Injury Prone Podcast. You look at me, I'm Jorge Martin, but hey, to my side right here, my compadre, mi amigo, el doctor, Edwin Porras. ¿Cómo estamos, amigo? ¿Cómo estamos?
Estamos bien, man. I'm ready to get into this football, talk a little bit, honestly, some venting from the 2023 season, but I'm really just excited to be back on air with you and your beautiful face, your beautiful smile. I really missed it, and I'm super excited to get into it, man. There's always this time period where after the season, I'm drained, and I'm sure you can relate to this. It was just a grind of 17, 18 weeks of doing the same stuff, and before that, we had the, you know how the June, July, August time period goes. And so you're just pretty drained with football. And then a couple of weeks after the Super Bowl, I really start getting the itch to like, well, what did this look like? Right. And questions start popping up in your head. Like what was the outcome of this? Or it felt like this guy really sucked down the stretch. Did he actually? And, asking those questions and answering them and getting back into the grind. I guess that's why they call it an addiction, huh?
And we do it for the love. We do it for the love. But hey, not just that. We're now a little bit closer. Before we were coast to coast. The last time we recorded, we were coast to coast. Now you've traded the Florida sunshine for Colorado snow, mi amigo. How has the transition been to the new location and private practice?
That's right, man. So big life change for me. Yeah, I decided to leave the Minnesota Twins. I'm not sure if we talked about this. I think we did. And I'm here in Denver now. This is sort of going to be home base now. This is where my wife and I want to be. It's got everything we want. It's got everything we need. I made the joke on Twitter that some people are joking or are saying that I'm here to be Adam Levitan's personal physical therapist. I wanted to dispel those myths. That's not true. Other people are saying I'm here to be Graham Barfield's personal physical therapist. It's also not true. I want to clear those rumors up. None of that is true. I'm here. I opened up my own practice, like you said, pro athlete physical therapy in Denver. Come see me, especially if you're a baseball athlete. It's sort of my specialty. But yeah, man, like I said, we're here. We're focused. We're locked in. I'm starting the business, opening the business. Go give me a 5-star review if you like the podcast and it's really helped you throughout. And it doesn't matter if I've ever treated you. I mean, a 5-star review is a 5-star review. Give it to the podcast. Give it to the clinic, right? So that's where we're at. I'm excited to be here with you again. Let's get into the ball talk, man.
I'm telling you, I have missed this. I have missed this. I don't know what I've missed, but I've missed this. I don't know, talking with you or just breaking down some cultura class. So I don't know which one's been, so we're going to do both. We're doing both today. So, and I do have a very special question for you on that one. That's, has to do with the new environment. But so familia, nuestros amigos y amigas. Okay, we're the Injury Prone Podcast. We're going to be doing plenty on looking back at 2023 injuries, if they're going to impact 2024. We're going to be talking timelines. We're going to talk about position groups, everything like that. As Edwin mentioned, he's in the lab studying and getting their timelines. What the things other than what you've already mentioned, compa, what are you looking forward to the most, kind of like looking ahead to 2024?
I get really excited when I look back at the Injury Prone Draft Guide, the inaugural edition, right? And I looked at all of the takes that I had. Obviously, we didn't nail 100% of them, but I was pretty happy with how those turned out. So refining that process, getting back into that system, using more historical comps, understanding exactly how a guy can or cannot return. And again, the difference between returning and performing, which I say all the time. Those are the things that I'm excited to get into. We'll definitely get into the prospects. There are a handful of prospects who are, dealing with injuries of their own or have an injury history. We'll definitely get into prospectism there. But yeah, other than that, I think that you pretty much covered it.
No, absolutely. I can't wait to talk about the position groups, the prospects themselves, everything. It's going to be good. I mean, this is kind of like how we're going to, chop things up looking ahead. And it could be, after the draft, when we know guys are coming in, as news comes in on guys coming back from injury, Kirk Cousins just just signed a big fat contract. He's still not all the way back from an Achilles injury. He should be back by the beginning of the season. That one, considering that he had the injury, I'll throw this one out to you right now. I didn't put it on the script, but since he's in the news, he signs a 4-year deal. He was injured in week 8. Kind of like, how do you see his timeline shaping up looking ahead to the 2024 season?
Yeah, I mean, it's different than Aaron Rodgers, and I've seen people talk about this, and it is true. It is Kirk Cousins' plant foot, right? So it's his back foot, as opposed to Aaron Rodgers was his front foot. So that is different. You obviously have a lot more stress that goes through it, but I mean, he's going to have more than enough time to get back to his pretty much non-mobile self, right? The issue that you worry about with him, considering he is, I think, 36 or something like that at this point, is how well he can bounce back in terms of staying healthy. Is he going to deal with calf strains? Is he going to have foot issues? And is he going to have foot pain, stuff like that? The reality is he was not that mobile before, but I mean, he's going to be Peyton Manning levels of immobile, I imagine, especially in the early going. So, in terms of coming back, he can definitely come back. But getting confidence and not getting the yips, that is something that you watch for with some of these guys, especially the older cats, after they have these injuries. So overall, I do expect him to be back. I do expect him to be semi-competent. I don't have any issues with him. I do think there's a slight chance, and with Rodgers, right? I do think there's a slight risk there in terms of secondary calf issues, because as we know, I've explained it before, the calf is a muscle that connects to the tendon, the Achilles tendon. So something to watch for.
No, that's awesome. That's awesome. And you know what? Yeah, because right now people are talking about him like he's a savior in Atlanta. And I know we're expecting better things. Obviously they traded Desmond Ridder already because of, to make room, but I'm like, people are talking about him like right now, like he's on par with Patrick Mahomes because he's a quarterback that actually moved this time of year. But yeah, let's not get crazy. We're going to talk about some. First off, I need to know something. You mentioned it a little bit. You mentioned Graham Barfield. Have you finally been able to get him to drink something other than Coors Diesel?
Graham, he marches to the beat of his own drum. But yeah, he's doing this thing where he's not drinking Coors Heavy anymore, and I really appreciate it. It is something that I think it was a good choice, and I finally moved him off of that because the Coors Heavy, yes, as we all know, is not for the faint of heart.
Yeah, no, definitely not. Even if you are in the, the Rocky Mountain High over there. So, all right. So I got a question that I put in the show doc a little bit. There was something I was having kind of like a debate with a friend of mine about who called Austin Eckler old, and Austin Eckler is 28 years old. So yeah, we should all don't get me started on where I am on the age curve if he's old. But that he talked about that, and I tried to convince him about suffering the after effects of a high ankle sprain, even after he returned to the field. You touched on it a little bit, but how much are we learning about the importance of kind of like really letting the body fully heal before a return to peak performance?
Yeah, it's going to vary from person to person, player to player, athlete to athlete. That's not something that you can necessarily, predict on a specific basis, but it's not easy to bounce back because it's especially from a high ankle sprain, right? There are so many different variations, so many different levels, and so many different grades and different severities, and guys respond differently to certain, like there's a very realistic reality where Austin Eckler had some sort of, and I'm not reporting this, I'm not saying this is the case, but I'm saying this is a plausible reality. He could have had an avulsion fracture, right? A small fracture off of the tip of his fibula that would take any other human 10 to 12 weeks to really recover from and get back to 100% shape from. That is a plausible outcome. That's something that we just can't say fully, right? Like we would have wished that we could have seen more from him, obviously, but there are so many extenuating circumstances that just make it seem like he just wasn't 100%, right? Like, I don't think that you get to age 28 and then all of a sudden you're running, that slowly. The other thing that I think is important to mention too, is these data that are coming out, this data that's important for fantasy points. If you look at Dwayne McFarland over at Fantasy Life, he's putting out pretty good data right now. And efficiency matters kind of, but the number one driver of fantasy points is simply opportunity. And if we think that Austin Eckler specifically is going to continue to get opportunity, then, I think that he can continue to strive. And yeah, man, if I'm turning 31 this month, if Austin Eckler is at the end of the age curve, then I'm basically dead.
Yeah, no. You're not old. He's not old. Come on. If LeBron's doing what he's doing at 40, what Brady was doing at 45, come on. We're good. And you're figuring out different ways to keep people young anyway. So to lengthen that. All right. So one of the things that kind of touching on like what we're, some of the takeaways that we're talking about, we saw so many quarterback injuries this year. And how fantasy players could be, there's recency bias that comes into play, psychology comes into play, and how they attack players coming off injuries. We heard a lot with CMC, a couple years ago, where you were one of the top people saying, don't overreact, draft him at the 101 2 years ago. And, he's been a stud the last 2 years. Are there any players kind of coming off injuries off the top of your head that we could be getting an ADP discount on in the coming season as things start rolling in?
Yeah, that's a tough one off the top of my head, because a lot of the injuries, unfortunately, that I can think of right away are pretty much close to worst case scenario. Like the Nick Chubb situation, that's close to worst case scenario. The TJ Hawkinson situation, that's pretty much close to a worst case scenario. I mean, who else did we have that had major injuries, right? J.K. Dobbins, that is worst case scenario. I think the number one guy that we can watch for that could pop, especially this is going to be the ultimate like thunder and lightning backfield, is going to be Keaton Mitchell. Keaton Mitchell's a guy to watch because he's young, he's athletic, and we assume he's going to get passing down work. Now, is he going to get a ton of volume? Probably not. Will his efficiency dip? Probably slightly. But I do think that depending on where he's going in ADP, he's the number one guy that right off the top of my head is somebody that I would want to target.
Yeah, and though he got hurt a little late, but I think he might be. I think he got hurt like in late December. I mean, late November, early December, thereabouts. So
he'll be on the border for PUP. And if the Ravens treat him like they treated Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins, like he might go on PUP. But I think that coming back from PUP, he can still potentially contribute.
Okay. All right. Well, let's get into the meat of the show. La carne, el mero mero. What we got? We talked about. You just recently put out an article on Fantasy Points, fantasypoints.com. Make sure to check that out. Okay. You talked about the severity of quarterback injuries, and really what were the quarterback injuries. You pointed out that there weren't it was a similar amount of injured players, but there were more. But it seems like there were more missed games. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers getting injured 4 games, but how could that have kind of let the quarterback injuries and even some of the other and the down the road impact from other players impacted? How did that leave fantasy managers kind of like feeling like, oh crap, on that season?
Yeah. So if it's interesting, right? Like if you felt that there were more quarterback injuries this season, you weren't necessarily wrong, but you also weren't necessarily right. And this is in the article over at fantasypoints.com. So this is what I wrote exactly, right? Even though the number of starting quarterbacks who missed time due to injury, and that's missed at least 2 games, were nearly identical to 2022. It was 20 quarterbacks this year, 19 in 2022 that missed time due to injury, starting quarterbacks. The difference between 22 and 23, the years, were that in 2022, the starting quarterbacks missed a sum total of 88 games. In 2023, the sum total missed games was 102 games, right? So that's almost a 20-game difference, right? And you think of guys like Joe Burrow, he was out an extended period of time. Kirk Cousins, at least, 9 weeks. Daniel Jones, he was out I think he only played like 5 weeks. Anthony Richardson, he missed most of the season. Deshaun Watson missed a ton of the season. Aaron Rodgers obviously missed basically the entire season. So those guys on their own that I just listed, those guys by themselves totaled 67 missed games. So the thing was that if you rostered Aaron Rodgers, right, if you drafted Kirk Cousins, if you drafted Joe Burrow, if you drafted Daniel Jones, basically you got them for, it was only about 40% of the season max with Joe Burrow. I think Joe Burrow and Kirk Cousins were right around that 40% of the season mark. So the problem was that when you lost a quarterback, you lost them for a big chunk of time. There were actually the similar amount of quarterbacks, and I wrote this in the article as well. Basically, the amount of quarterbacks who missed, I think it was 7+ games, was through the roof, whereas quarterbacks who missed 1 to 3 games, that was actually pretty static. So it was just the length of time that these starting quarterbacks were out.
And it was the good, and it was some of the best of the best. I mean, Burrow was like, QB4, QB5, going off at ADP. A lot of people were excited about Daniel Jones, and I mean, you had Aaron Rodgers in that kind of like 10 to 14 range that he was going off at, because people were like really excited about him. So that's one thing, and Justin Herbert missed a chunk of the season at the end after he broke his finger. Those two guys in particular, Burrow and Herbert, those guys were drafted, and actually, well, those two plus Anthony Richardson, who may be looked at as a top 10 quarterback in ADP. Could we get a discount on these guys? Just thinking, with people kind of thinking they didn't finish the season healthy, I'm kind of hoping to get a discount on them, and could it be worthwhile?
I think the number one guy that I'm really thinking of right now that could potentially give you a discount is definitely Anthony Richardson. I can already see it. It's going to be he's injury prone. It's going to be he runs too much. It's going to be running quarterbacks get injured all the time. It's going to be all the same stuff that we've already disproven. Anthony Richardson is likely going to learn from his mistakes. He's going to learn to slide. He's going to learn to not take a hit. He's going to learn to be more like Lamar Jackson. He's not going to be and his mind is now slipping my name, Jaden Daniels from LSU, just recklessly running into every defender he can find.
I was just going to talk about
Anthony Richardson is going to learn, and he's going to figure this out. Was Anthony Richardson specifically responsible for his head injury and his shoulder injury? No, I'm not going to put the entire blame on him. Could he have given up on a play at the goal line? Yes. What is the nature of any competitor that's at the goal line trying to score a touchdown, right? Like, you're telling him to take it to slide there. I'm not sure if that would have been the right call. You would have had fans on him either way, right? Oh, a guy doesn't want to compete. Then the guy competes, like, oh, the guy can't stay healthy. So this was honestly like a 1% outcome for him to need AC sprain, like an AC joint shoulder surgery in general. That you don't see that often. It's not as common. So, Irsay is going to talk to him. The Colts are going to talk to him. Coaching staff's going to talk to him. He's getting paid to stay on the field. This isn't high school or college. These guys are professionals. These conversations are being had. Staying healthy, talking to the athletic trainers, those conversations are being had. So I expect a safer Anthony Richardson, and I expect a healthy Anthony Richardson, and I expect a lot of upside with Anthony Richardson.
Yeah, I'm pumped. He's one of the guys I'm really pumped about. I mean, we need more Konami code quarterbacks, and he's bigger than Lamar Jackson, but he's that 4.44, that was one of the fastest. That was still the fastest 40 time for any quarterback ever. So, and he's bigger than Lamar Jackson. But yeah, you're right. He's got to get out of bounds and just be able to and actually, our amigo Matt Harmon likes to talk about ecosystems. They're bringing everything back. Jonathan Taylor's behind him, so he's going to have a great running game. Michael Pittman is, just got re-signed, so they've got the running backs. They've got the stud running back. They've got the wide receiver group with the clear number one receiver. I think that's they're really building something there. They just need him to, number one, stay healthy. Like you said, learn how to slide. But yeah, he's going to watch plenty of tape of Lamar Jackson. By the way, he was the poster child last year of running quarterbacks get hurt, 16 games. And the only reason he sat out 17 is because they'd already clinched. So yeah, and MVP. So yeah, Adios mio.
Not to
Forget
mention
that.
Tua. Not to mention Tua. Don't get me started.
Right.
I can get on a soapbox. Ni empiezas, mi amigo.
We'll be doing that. So that's gonna be that's gonna be good times. That's gonna be good times. But yeah, I mean there could be injuries though. I think I'm going to be very curious to see what the ADP is going to do for what Kirk Cousins going to Atlanta is going to do for Drake London and Kyle Pitts, who I'm teasing that I'm going to tease this for a future episode. We're gonna have a nice little discussion on Kyle Pitts, how healthy he was, but that's gonna a little teaser episode. So really, let's talk about the impact of the quarterback injuries. So it sounds simple enough. Top player at the hardest position is injured. It stands to reason that the whole offense is going to suffer overall. I mean, maybe it's not going to be as extreme as happened with the Jets, who really didn't have a good plan, backup plan at quarterback. Cincinnati had a good backup plan, but compa, let's talk about some of the guys who were impacted. And you got a long list, but here's some guys who were impacted by the injuries. Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, two guys right off the Joe Mixon, just on the Bengals right there. You had Saquon Barkley, Darren Waller from the Giants, Michael Pittman, Jonathan Taylor with Anthony Richardson, Nick Chubb, obviously he was impacted, but Amari Cooper impacted, though Joe Flacco time helped him, but Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson. Breece Hall, one of your your winning takes from last season, from last offseason. So but again, let's talk about. I want you to kind of like lay out kind of how you had it somewhat in the article, but just how what losing the quarterback, how it's going to impact the players.
Yeah, I think the number one thing to set up here is the obvious, because sometimes, I think a lot of times, fantasy players make assumptions without actually seeing the data and knowing that it's a fact. The assumption here is that you lose the quarterback, okay, you're going to lose wide receiver or pass catcher production, right? That's the assumption. That assumption essentially is true. Not all the time and not by a great extent, but it's true. You make another assumption. The second assumption is, well, if you lose the starting quarterback, especially if the quarterback is, I don't know, Nick Mullins or something, right? Like the assumption is, okay, you're going to lean on the run game. That is even more so true. Like those are the two general takeaways that this article really, if you don't want to read the article, let's just go click on it, please. And then I'll tell you the ending. The ending is pass catchers are impacted by the dude who's throwing the ball more so than the dude who's handing the ball off. In most cases, and again, this is like, there are so many factors. Football's so random. You have to assume rational coaching. You have to assume competent scheming. You have to assume at least average production from a running back. But generally speaking, when these quarterbacks go down, even the top wide receivers like Justin Jefferson, right? He is a guy that you drafted 1.01. He definitely did not perform like the 1.01, right? It's not that he couldn't still put up massive numbers, but you didn't really see the same performance. And I would say, even though Justin Jefferson had his own hamstring strain, he took so much time off that theoretically, right? I can't say this for a fact. He was back to close to 100% by the time he got back. So this is an example, right? Justin Jefferson, he went from the wide receiver 3 with Kirk Cousins, averaging 22 points per game. He tumbled all the way down to wide receiver 21. He averaged just 14 points per game. That is not, obviously, that's not even like a first round, second round pick, right? So even though he can go off, at any time, like he did the last week in week 18 when it didn't matter, and even though we'll take 14 points, like it wasn't the 1.01 that you paid for. You can say the same thing about a guy like, let's say, who else? Jamar Chase, right? Jamar Chase had his own injury issues, but at the same time, Chase didn't really perform that well after Joe Burrow went down. He had like an explosion game and he had his low back and his shoulder issues, which I understand, like that sort of muddies the water a little bit. But here's what I wrote about Jamar Chase, right? So in 9 games with Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase surpassed 12 points. That's kind of arbitrary, right? But that's like a wide receiver 2-ish. He surpassed 12 fantasy points, PPR fantasy points, 66% of the time. Without Burrow, he crossed 12 points just one time, right? So even though it was an explosion game, again, because they can still do that because they're still talented in their own right, that intrinsic tie to whoever's throwing the ball is obviously extremely important. You look at another guy, Devontae Adams. His production was essentially the same, but he still didn't put up ceiling numbers, right? I think Devontae Adams averaged like, I don't know, like 16 points per game or something like that. So
but he was
like
he was inconsistent.
he was extremely inconsistent.
I mean, he
Exactly.
was a baller. He won people leagues in if they got to week 17, but the previous week he was just he was almost non-existent. So it was up and down and up and down. So yeah,
And
that
the other question is, so does offensive production from pass catchers specifically go down too? Well, not always, right? So you look at Chicago. This was the craziest, writing this article, this was the craziest thing that I saw, but afterwards, sort of in hindsight, it made sense, right? So the Bears pass catchers, they essentially didn't drop off at all, right? From a fantasy points production, they dropped 2%, which is negligible. They basically were maintained with Tyson Bagent. They maintained the same amount of fantasy points per game without him, and it was a decent sample. It was 5 games. Even though that stayed equal, all their pass catchers, DJ Moore went from averaging 20 points per game with Justin Fields, which included a 49-point performance and a 27-point performance, right? He averaged 20 points per game. With Tyson Bagent, he averaged like 9.8 points per game. So that is a stark difference, right? But you look at the offense pretty much functioned at the same level. Here's where the difference was, right? So then you look at a dude like Cole Kmet, right? Who the heck started Cole Kmet? Probably a handful of people actually probably did in some instances. Cole Kmet with Bagent, he jumped from 11 points per game to 13. That's not something to scoff at, especially at the tight end position, right? Additionally, 2 of Kmet's 3 best fantasy outings in general came with Tyson Bagent, not Justin Fields, right? So even though the Bears pass catchers points per game was unchanged, I mean, it went from the star of the show being DJ Moore to the star of the show being Cole Kmet. So that just tells you all of those dudes I just listed, right? All those teams I just listed, the Bengals, the Vikings, the Bears, all of those teams, they all responded so differently. Some of them, their total offense dipped. The Bengals, in the Bengals case, their offensive production went up, but Jamar Chase's went way down, right? So all of these ups and downs, all that tells you is that the takeaway is that your pass catchers, when the starting quarterback goes down, are much more volatile. So even though there's still lottery tickets and guys to target, I wouldn't necessarily at this point, after doing this research, I know it's just 1 year, I know it's a small sample, I would not be targeting those guys if their starting quarterback goes down. I'm more than willing to gamble on they're probably not going to be the same guy because their starter's down.
And it kind of stands to reason at that point that the tight ends would pick up some, or maybe even the slot receivers, the people who are getting the ball closer to the line of scrimmage. Jamar Chase is otherworldly talented, but if he's winning downfield, and the quarterback, Browning had himself some good games, but he wasn't always looking for Chase down the field. A lot of times it was get him to do some short to intermediate stuff and let his legs kind of do the work. But you found something, you touched on it a little bit, that running backs in a lot of ways were positively impacted because it looked like they got more, they were emphasized more. I'd love to see what you found on there.
Yeah, so I think if you look at the entire sample, backfield point per game change after the quarterback went down, backfields went up by 10%, while pass catchers, they stayed neutral. They stayed, essentially the same, but you have all of those outliers that I mentioned where Jefferson was down, Jamar Chase was down, DJ Moore was down, even though the team passing points per game stayed neutral. The theory on that, at least my theory, is that the starter was down, so I think they were passing a lot more, which led to a lot more garbage time for a lot of more random guys, but I don't think it necessarily maintained the production for the top guys. And then in terms of overall backfields, yeah, man, like the overall backfield point per game change went up by 10%. But if you look at some of the teams who improved, I mean, you're looking at the Bengals, their running back production, their backfield production went up 70%. The Raiders went up 67%. The Steelers went up 40%. The Vikings went up 40%. The Giants went up 40%. Just production from the backfield was much more predictable. So the takeaway there, I mean, and I guess I can give you some examples, right? Joe Mixon is probably the best example who Joe Mixon today just signed a nice little extension with the Texans. I was not expecting that, but I don't know who was. But if you look at Joe Mixon from a pre-Burrow versus a post-Burrow game, Joe Burrow went down And after he did, Joe Mixon averaged 18 points per game, and he had a median of 19 points per game. Before that, Mixon was averaging just 13 points per game, and his median was also 13. So the Bengals' backfield increased by 70%, and Joe Mixon was the obvious benefactor there. So that another guy, Josh Jacobs. I know there's a sort of controversy like Jimmy G got benched, but it all counts the same. You go to a backup, they're still a backup. You perform like Aiden O'Connell did, you're still a backup. And you see Josh Jacobs, he went from a 16 point per game average. And before that, it was 13, right? So even though guys, let me see if I read that right. The median fantasy points per game, 16, 17. Yeah, he went from 13 points per game to 16 points per game because they were leaning, on the run game more. So basically what you're saying here, if you have at least a good, right? We're not talking Alexander Madison, that's a whole different can of worms. If you have a running back who's good to great and their starting quarterback goes down, those guys are trade targets. Those guys are indirect injury discounts. That's at least what my takeaway was.
No, I definitely, you talked about the Steelers. You mentioned them in that group. They definitely saw a little bit of a offensive renaissance there. I mean, they took their shots with George Pickens because Mason Rudolph was, had a decent deep ball, but really it was just they emphasized Najee Harris. I mean, Najee Harris won people leagues there during weeks 15 to 17 because he was pounding it. He was pounding the rock. Even Jalen Warren helped him out a little bit there. So yeah. So again, it's seeing that running game just getting so much more emphasized there. And you also, I mean, gosh, and you also talked about how in the article how the Chargers really just saw their offense just get tanked when
Chargers. I think, man, the Chargers were the non-playoff version of the Eagles. Man, I think they just gave up. I mean, Keenan Allen didn't play. Mike Williams had been out because he tore his ACL. Austin Eckler, the heart of the team, probably felt and knew that he was on his way out. Justin Herbert injured the finger and then injured, whatever. I don't even remember what it was at this point. George, there's so many injuries. That team, unfortunately, man, like they were one of two teams. They were one of just two teams who got worse from a backfield production standpoint and a pass catcher standpoint. Man, they were just bad and they were the worst. They were the worst definitely in pass catching. They went down by 21%. And from a backfield perspective, they went down by a whopping, and I mean whopping 44% production. So without Justin Herbert, that offense basically imploded. And now they have a guy who takes his shirt off and climbs trees with recruits, and they hired Greg Roman. So man, I'm not sure. I don't get it. I understand, Jim Harbaugh is from one of the royal families of football, and I get that, but it just doesn't. I would love your opinion on this, but I'm not excited about the Chargers. I think there's some unknown, but I'm not. I can't get excited. I don't think Justin Herbert's going to be much better. I don't think, they cut Mike Williams. I don't know what's going to happen with Keenan Allen. I mean, he's been going at a crazy clip, but he's going to be 33. How long can that go on?
Yeah.
Austin Eckler's gone. Like, I just don't know what this offense or what this team is going to look like. They'll probably be competent, right? I know that they're going to trot out a competent team. I think that they'll strive for 500, but from a fantasy production standpoint, I'd love to get your thoughts there.
I think what's unfortunate about this, I think that it's the only unfortunate thing is you talked earlier about what Dwayne has been doing. It's opportunity. I think Justin Herbert, his total pass attempts are going to go down. I think this is going to be this is going to be a lot of running in this offense. And obviously they added Gus Edwards. I think they're going to add at least a running back. Everybody's, comping Blake Corum to them already. And they'll have kind of like a thunder and lightning thing. I think what's going to happen is they are going to be targeted in their pass attempts, and it's going to focus on the wide receivers. And I think it's going to be some Keenan Allen, but I think they're going to need at least one more because the tight ends that they've brought in are blocking tight ends. They're basically like glorified fullbacks. So it's going to be a rushing attack. It's not going to be as basic as what he had in Michigan because he's got just more talented players. everyone's going to say Justin Herbert is an upgrade over JJ McCarthy. Of course, he's where JJ McCarthy wants to be at some point. But I just think I think it's going to be there's going to be some smash mouth football, but again, I think whereas Justin Herbert in the year that he threw 5,000 yards, he threw over 650 passes. I think he was even pushing 700. That's going to come backward. That's going to come back to about 550 pass attempts, and it's just going to play off the efficiency. But yeah, I think this is going to be a learning curve year, with the second year, 2025 being a better season for the Chargers.
Imagine coming into a division with Patrick Mahomes, who just came off the worst offensive performance the Chiefs have had, thinking that the solution is to bring in Greg Roman, who he himself admitted his offense is medieval. I don't get that. I'm sorry if you're a Chargers fan. I don't understand it. I think I hate this. I know I said I'm not excited. I really think that I just hate it. So I don't know. We'll see. Maybe they'll prove me wrong, but I doubt it.
Yeah, hopefully it definitely proves it wrong. It definitely proves it wrong. So that compa, that was awesome. That was an awesome breakdown of really all of the positions. And I mean, I guess just, I know it kind of simplifies things a little bit, but you know what? It really shows the importance of the quarterback position, and not just to not just to their own fantasy production, but really just the production of the team in general, what it does for the players, and especially the pass catchers. So I think it's just, I think it's wonderful the way that was broken down. So I wanted to see if we could close up shop, and we always talk about Cultura class. So I want to know, you've been by coastal, you lived in NorCal for a while, but now you've had Miami. So I want to know the difference in the food of our raza, Mexican food, la comida mexicana. Give me the difference, and what are some of the local favorites now in the new place?
Okay, so I'm going to break this down in the most objective way possible, because that's what I do. I'm a data-driven individual. Considering the Mexican food in Florida, in the area that I was in Southwest Florida primarily. We want to rank these on a couple of different fronts, on a handful of different fronts. You want to look at accessibility, right? How much of it is there? How much resource belongs? You want to look, or not belongs, but how much of the resource is actually there? You want to look at quality. What is the quality of the food? What does it taste like? The nitty gritty, when people say, they like this food, it tastes good, blah, blah, blah. And then the third is sort of that intangible quality, sort of like, Joe Burrow's a winner type of quality. You can't really put your finger on it type of quality. It's the feel, like, how do you feel? Do you feel like you're being transported back to your abuelita's house or whatever? And I got to say, Florida failed on all three marks. They tried their best. My wife and I found one place. It was a carniceria. They made decent beans. The beans were good. Rice, not so good. We didn't get to try the pozole or anything like that. So, ultimately they had one good taco. We also found one good taco truck. And by the way, this is not without trying. We tried. We found another good taco place with good birria tacos. But, it was a valiant effort, not the same. Here in Denver, it's very different. You look at accessibility, A+. There are a lot of us out here, Jorge. There are a lot of Mexicans. It's like you called it. You said it's like light
volume,
like California light. Exactly. There were volume shooters out here. I like it. It's not quite Florida, where they initially speak to you in Spanish, but it's close, right? You get a lot of Spanish speaking people out here, and I love it. Mi raza, mi gente. So accessibility, volume, it's there. Quality, also there. And a lot of that comes from just having the opportunity, having bigger numbers. And then there are basically carnicerias and panaderias every which way direction you turn. So I do feel like, hey, if I want to transport back to my abuelita's house, I can go to the store, buy the abuelita chocomil, buy the crackers that she used to make, or that she used to eat, and I'm right there, right? So on all fronts, I'm very happy with Denver. I was very surprised by the accessibility, but from a cultura class perspective, I got to tell you, if you want to try Mexican food and you're in Denver, in the Denver area, we said this before on the show before, Jorge, find a hood, maybe find your local Mexican to go with you, then find the hood, go to the taco truck there. It doesn't matter. Throw a rock. It'll probably be good. Denver is a low-key spot for really good Mexican food.
No, I love it. I love it. You know what? I've been to Colorado a few times. Very little amount of time spent in Denver, but everybody raves about the chile colorado. So is it what it's supposed to be?
It is, and it's everywhere. They put it in everything. I will say one thing about Denver, that if you come, you can't go to places that I won't say their names. You can't go to, I call mainstream restaurants, what would be considered, honestly, it's not even really Tex-Mex. I think people from Texas would be offended if you called it Tex-Mex. It's a take on Mexican food because it's the culture so prevalent here. Other people have tried to sort of mimic it or create their own version. To be 100% honest, I try to give everybody the benefit of the doubt. The food is not good. So you got to go to a taco truck or a carniceria or panaderia. You can't just go to one of these sort of stand brick and mortar Mexican restaurants, because most of them are going to be a bust.
Yeah, it's like it often happens. The places that maybe like spend up, they're trying to be too mainstream. So yeah, no, get the taco trucks. To me, I mean, especially out here, and it's you can't have a bad taco at a taco truck. But yeah, you got to definitely do it right that way. Do it right. Find a good place. Yeah, and you're right. Go to the hood. Yeah, get someone to show you the way. So just go to during the day. That's the other important part. Durante el día. So yeah, and anywhere that they're making, anywhere that you see people making tortillas, that's handmade tortillas, that's clutch. That's gonna be clutch. It's gonna be good. So compa, I can't wait to be doing these on the regular now. We're gonna have a lot of really good content coming up. Okay, so again, make sure, first off, Pro Athlete Physical Therapy. Okay, that's follow, what's the Twitter handle otra vez?
Pro Athlete PT everywhere. Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. It's all Pro Athlete PT.
Yeah, and you're going to find them at FB Injury Doc, so you got them there. So find them there. Fantasy Points, the work at Fantasy Points. Hey, you know where to find me. You got me at Jorge Martin 17 on Twitter. I still got plenty of content coming out on Yahoo. Baseball content right now too. So baseball and I'm kind of dipping between the two. So, but yeah, also gonna still have the Familia FFP podcast coming out. Kind of sporadic. It's kind of hard to get it out weekly right now, but maybe a little bit more regular during the off season. So, but yeah. Can't tell you how excited I am to bring you guys great content on the Injury Prone podcast. Also, make sure you're getting into the Patreon. Okay, Injury Prone, patreon.com/injury prone. Okay, familia, get in there. Okay. Otra vez, any parting shots, compa? No, we're good. Well, muchas gracias everybody for joining us. Adios. Salud.